Melita.
Are you in, Aniket?
Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Melita on behalf of India Diversity Forum. Welcome you all to yet another Novartis Presents D&I Pe Charcha March edition. Despite the continued efforts of activists and policymakers in many ways, gender equality is still a pipe dream. To counter this, equal pay is legally enforced in most organized sectors. The reasons for gender pay gap are a little more complicated and can be linked to reasons ranging from the socio-economic to the structural and many more. It is important for D&I experts and HR leaders or leaders in any role to spread awareness about gender pay parity and should stand for equal pay rights. Hence, India Diversity Forum is giving a platform to spread such awareness and have equal pay parity in corporate India. Let us now begin this month's Novartis Presents D&I Pe Charcha. The topic for today's Charcha is gender pay gap to pay parity. Is corporate India heading in the right direction? The D&I experts joining us today are Simi Chaudhary, Senior Manager HR, Diversity and Inclusion, Prudence Inc. Vanita Nitin, Head HR, Alliance Partner. Shreya Ghosh Oberoi, Head Diversity and Inclusion, JSW. And the moderator for the session is Mr. Ans Raja Joseph, Head People and Organization, Novartis. Over to you, Mr. Ans.
Hey, Melita, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear fellow panelists. It's a great delight and privilege and honor to be here to talk about this very interesting and intriguing topic, gender pay parity, and how is corporate India preparing itself to move ahead. The first important step is to acknowledge the issue. The second is to have a dialogue. And the third one is to remediate. And I think by having a deeper dialogue, we are not only trying to remediate, but also spread awareness with our fellow colleagues to ensure that we move in the right direction. So with that, let's get started for this interesting dialogue for the evening. And Simi, Vanita, and Shreya, once again, a big thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Ranking at 112th position, 112th position on the Gender Gap Index in 2020, India will take close to 100 years to bridge the gap in terms of pay parity. We are ranked 112th, and if we continue the same rate, it will take around 100 years to bridge this gap. Is this sustainable? The answer is no. We need to accelerate, and we have to step up the pedal. Whilst at the first glance, the gender pay gap predominantly deals with salary, but there are several layers that we need to analyze. Secondly, with each passing year, the gap just keeps widening, and it's important that we have concentrated effort to narrow this down. Now, closing the gender wage gap is a destination that requires organizations to take a journey to encourage women's participation and to create a safer work environment, without which it will not be possible to achieve true equality of women in workplace. Now, steps are not only taken by corporations, but even at the level of United Nations. The United Nations Equal Pay International Coalition, which is called as EPIC, so EPIC, EPIC, it aims at bringing transparency and equality in pay. And many organizations have signed up to this to ensure that there is true parity and there is transparency and equality in pay. And Novartis, the organization which I represent today, is also one of the signatories to this EPIC pledge. Now, there are 4 key pillars to this EPIC pledge. The first one is around pay equity, which means we pay the same irrespective of the gender for the job an individual does. And the second one is around pay transparency, which is ensuring that individuals know where they are pegged against the market and they have full transparent information on why their salary is X or Y. The third one is to remove bias while making an offer. Now, this is a very interesting point because sometimes when we have second career for individuals, it can be both men or women, we find that they are at a loss because they have taken a break, right, for various reasons. So what is it that organizations can do differently to remove this bias while making offers? And many times we find organizations asking for the last salary and then making an offer against that last salary. And at times talent lose out on it because of various reasons. So how can we remove this bias? And lastly, how do we have equal representation of leaders, not men leaders and not women leaders, but leaders at senior management level? So these are the 4 different pillars that Novartis is focusing on to achieve that we have equality, equity, and transparency in what we do. Now, in today's dialogue, we will delve into deeper aspects of these to get your experiences and also share with the audience as industry leaders what your thoughts are and what they can do in their organizations to really strengthen this and reduce the disparity that we have. With that, let's get started. So my first question is why? Why this disparity? Now, we know that there is inequity, but I'm still thinking, why did this happen? And why this inequity exists? So maybe, Vanita, let us start with you to understand what do you think, why this inequality or disparity exists?
Sure. Thanks, Hans. Very important question to try and get to the basics of why we are here, right? Why is this discussion even relevant or required? Right. And also the very fact is to acknowledge that this is a problem that exists. And maybe the more we come together and speak about it, it creates more awareness and, inclusion in organizations. In my view, inequity in pay, it's more evolved than intentional. And as you rightly put, right, it will take many more years for us to bridge the gap, and it has evolved over a period of time. And if we actually see practices of organizations, organizations have predefined when we are hiring people. We have predefined salary ranges, which are defined as benchmarks for experience and skill. That is how most organizations define their hiring strategy, right? There is no intentional differentiation in terms of gender difference when we are hiring. Then how does this gap really occur? I think what we do not intentionally provision for when we are doing this exercise is to say, when women actually come to that particular phase of life, when they need to take a career break, maybe for maternity or childcare reasons, which are more biological, and of course, the big differentiator when it comes to a juncture of career between men and women, is organizations do not provision for this kind of a break when it happens, when we are welcoming women back from a career break, right? Because at that juncture, are we talking about experience? Equal experience means just number of years of experience. Do organizations provision for experience to say, as we grow higher in the hierarchy, in the corporate ladder, what matters is your leadership skills, your multitasking, your ability to plan and manage, which are also life skills that are acquired over various areas, right? So somewhere I think together organizations need to come together to say, how do we move away from just sheer number of years of work experience versus how can we talk about qualifying leadership behavior and experience, which will help contribute in the organization.
Wonderful, Vanita. Wonderful. Shreya, maybe let me come over to you. What do you think could be the other factors that contribute to this increasing gap?
Thanks. And can you hear me well?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think I agree with Vanita to a huge extent, but I feel that it's natural for inequities to exist because everyone does not go through the same experiences in life. Now, organizations have to actually be mindful of this, when they are selecting people. For example, now I would like to share my personal story here. I took a 4-year break. I clubbed it with several things, like it was a study break for me. I also traveled out of the country. I had a very different experience of living in another country. At the same time, I also became a mother. So I felt that there were so many different things that I learned. I used this break. However, when I came back to corporate world, trying to get a job for myself, firstly, it was tough. But when I did get a job, I actually got the role with the same salary that I had 4 years back. So what I realized is that my peers and we were doing the same kind of role, but they were getting paid more for it, and I was getting paid less. Right. And this actually was like a waterfall effect for me. So every organization that I went to, always my appraisals, everything was dependent on what I was currently earning. So, that gap actually kept increasing through the years. And now also, I think after many years, it still impacts me when I look at my peers. Another experience that I'd like to share, and this is also quite unfortunate, is that, when in one of the organizations I worked for, my supervisor, while in jest, so he was joking about it, but he said, why do you need a big increment? Your husband is earning and he's going to take care of the family. Right. And I think this kind of mindset, I mean, there are other people listening to this conversation, and I think the mindset is actually driving or trying to trivialize women's role in workplace, or even their salary or aspirations to grow, right? And lastly, I'd really like to share one more very funny conversations that I'd had with one of my colleagues, who said that, women, they earn to spend on themselves. So they're actually not making any impact, And I told him that as per, WF, the World Fund Organization, it shows that women actually spend a lot more on their families than themselves. Compared to men. So, women are putting the money back into the economy. So there's actually, benefits to everybody if women are at an equal pay level. But these are some of the inequities that have just creeped into our society.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful stories. And thank you for sharing. And I could see our audience actually resonating with this, and there are a few interesting comments that are coming up. So thank you for sharing that. That was very, very powerful. And to an extent, a reflection of a reality. And now that we have spoken about the why, so maybe let's move the direction a little further. And Simi, I could see that you had a big smile and you were just nodding your head while Shreya was sharing the stories. So maybe let me come to you, Simi. What systemic policies, regulatory interventions, or organization commitments do you think are required to narrow this gap and to achieve pay parity? Because now that we know why this is happening, let's get into the solutions. What do you think can be done here, please?
Thank you, Ans. So yes, I mean, I was nodding in agreement because I think most of us women have very similar stories and many more, so to speak. I liked what Vanita mentioned about consciously nobody is trying to create that disparity. And therefore, it leads us to the question of, is it all happening unconsciously, right? So consciously, I think, we all have our hearts in the right place, but biases, stereotypes are so deep-seated in our brains that we are actually excluding women from the workforce. We are not accelerating their growth and their development, and it's not intentional. It's probably happening unconsciously. So I think there is a lot for organizations to do. I think there's a lot for the government to do. I think, today the government is doing a lot with, helping, women in the rural India with loans for, MSME industry, the Mudra scheme, the, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, and so many other, in just the other day, 2 days ago, I saw the government launching an initiative for scholarship for transgender people, right? So let's not forget that, many transgender people identify as women. So I think the government is trying its best to address this. I also feel that corporate world has a much bigger and powerful role to play. And by, talking about it, by trying to, bring in those inclusive policies, etc., would be the first step. So I think, Ans, let's start with just a pay parity audit. I mean, it's a very simple exercise, right? And I have launched this in the past. It honestly is a very, very simple exercise to do. Just took me a couple of, days to run this. And there, let the data talk back to you. And then have the commitment to start making changes. Now, many leaders, they see this data and they say, okay, we will start making incremental changes. I am sorry, incremental changes will not help. Today, world over, we are talking about a woman making 8 cents to $1 that a man makes. So again, if you look at that statistic, it's coming more from the uncontrolled pay parity surveys, right? Where you're comparing all men with all women. So probably not the best indicator. But if you do a controlled pay parity exercise, where you look at common job roles, common jobs that are being delivered, and male and female, there you would see that a woman is typically earning 9 cents to $1, 90 cents to $1 that her male colleague is making. Now, you and I may say 10 cents, big deal. But excuse me, over a period of time, this is just expanding so much.
Absolutely.
Right? So just start with a pay audit in terms of, and I'm happy if anybody wants to reach out and, understand how this is done. Very important also for organizations to keep in mind is that take a few steps back. Let's go back to the value chain. Okay, so where is all this stemming from, right? So when we did the pay audit, before we realized, oh, wow, we're pretty much there or we are not there and there seems to be a problem, we went back and saw how we were promoting our women employees. We were looking at how the performance data was looking like. And we saw so many systemic biases. Biases in the way women were being rated as a top performer, and that further adds to the lower hikes that they get. So lesser number of promotions, lesser number of people, women at the top performing level. So many different things. So it's a systemic issue, and one needs to study the entire ecosystem. One needs to, and I really like what Shreya says, that mindful, that's a very powerful word. You have to be intentional and deliberate if you have to address this. A lot of awareness, trust me, if our organizations are filled up with 70% men and 60% men, I think there's a lot of gender discrimination sort of trainings, unconscious bias trainings. And again, like Vanita mentioned, that nobody's doing it intentionally, and therefore can we set some targets, because what gets measured gets done. Unfortunately, diversity doesn't come organically to us, right? Birds of the same feather flocking together. So I think those are some of the points. I would just say, just dive in. Corporates have this powerful role of making a huge change in and around where they, operate, and start from home. So start from, your own women employees, and then there's a whole lot to do in the partnership with government and other, agencies and bodies. So I'll take a pause here.
Oh, absolutely, Simi. It needs to start at home with us. And when I say at home, in our own organizations, right? And you're very right. We need to break the bias. And there is this very interesting saying that says, if a woman is left behind, a full generation is left behind. So I think small incremental changes will not help us. We need to really make big, bold step changes so that we gallop ahead in this mission. And the ecosystem that you spoke about, the government and other enablers are actually doing their part. And now it is for corporate India to really step up and move ahead. So continuing on that dialogue, Vanita, let me come to you and say, what are the other thoughts that you may have on this? What is it that we can do differently here?
So thanks, Ams. In fact, I actually was wanting to also add on to Simi's point. I will just share about what our organization Alliance Partners did recently. Globally, as Alliance Partners group, we actually, the same point that Simi said, right? We threw ourselves in and we said, okay, we want to get ourselves audited for gender pay parity. So we applied for EDGE certification, which is an established process for gender pay parity and equality. They go through your numbers. Of course, it's a very exhaustive audit that happens in terms of our various practices that organizations follow in terms of what is the promotion criteria. They go through your data, look at all of this, and of course, I'm very pleased and proud to say that we have been certified as a group, and also as the India entity as well, apart from many other entities. But most importantly, it is the first step, right, of saying we want to check whether we are there. I think that point requires a lot of commitment from the leadership. To say that, yes, this is important. We believe that diversity of, gender diversity and having more women with equitable opportunities brings that much profitability and impact to the organization. So that is the first point of commitment that leadership teams need to come to before we can throw ourselves to be vulnerable to say, okay, now can I measure myself to see whether I'm there or not? Because many times when we go for an audit, there will be data, and rightly so, like Simi said, while we have been certified, we've also been given inputs to say these are areas where these are recommendations which you could perhaps look at, right? And now the idea is to say we are not sitting back and saying, okay, we are now certified, let's just sit back and have a good time, but most importantly to say, how do we carry this agenda forward? How are we making those recommendations come true? How do we educate our managers to say that, when you are having your performance conversations, when you are evaluating your employees, where do you bring in that right balance? So I think that is very important. I can also share another example where in one of my previous organizations, it was an intentional exercise at the senior management level, where at the time of calibration exercise during promotions and even during pay increases, every function had to showcase, apart from the standard bell curves, whether it was followed, not followed, we also had to show and see and get approved what is the gender balance in terms of promotions and ratings. Whether there was a balance that was followed, if there was any bias that was questioned, challenged, so that things are not unconsciously left behind. So that many levels of checks help us create more awareness within the organization, and therefore then it becomes part of the DNA.
Wonderful, Vanita. Thank you very much. Whether it is the EPIC pledge, EDGE certification, or the pay audits that Simi spoke about, I think we need to consciously dive into it. And leadership plays an important role. The moment leaders walk the talk and they move away from differentiating men and women and say that they are leaders, that really changes the entire perspective. On this note, let me also invite the audience to send in their questions. Already there are a few on the channel, so we will come back to them. But please keep posting your questions. We are having some interesting conversation today. Okay, so now let's move on. And coming back to the panel, and Shreya, I saw you were applauding the certification. So thanks for that, Shreya. Yes, kudos to you, Vanita, and to your organization on that, from all of us. So Shreya, then maybe let me come to you. We have been talking about the ecosystem, right? What is it that women can do for themselves to bridge this gap? Is there an opportunity? How is it that breaking the stereotypes will help us to accelerate this journey? What are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, so like we've been talking about the corporates, the government, I think they are playing very large roles. I mean, if you just take the corporate India, it's not just the employees, it's their families, it's their customers, employees, everybody gets impacted by corporate India. And of course, government, makes certain rules statutory, for example, equal pay wages. Every state has equal pay wages, which is really the beginning or maybe the, start of how we control this pay gap. But yes, I think from a woman's perspective, there still has to be a lot of work done. If you look at, if you compare basically, and this is again from my experience, women are far more uncomfortable or sometimes even shy to have that pay discussion, when they are going through approvals, and just put it bluntly out there. Even during negotiations with a new company when they plan to join, again, there is not a very active or sometimes not even a very aggressive push for saying that, okay, no, I won't join if you don't give me like a 45% or things like that, right? So I think this is the inherent behavior which has to change. This attitude has to change. And I think what women can do for themselves is basically learn from other senior women. Today, there are many, many role models who are out there in big roles. We've recently also heard about Leena Nair, who was, CHRO moving into a CEO role. I think today there are enough examples of women in all kinds of roles, basically giving like that equal competition or even, better competition to the other sex, right? So I think this is where women need to play a role, get encouraged, create these internal networks. And I think that has really helped, because when you reach out to, let's say you've created a network, you have mentors in maybe even other companies, so, you can just reach out to them and ask them that this is what I'm going through. So what do you suggest? What can we do? And then that actually supports women and builds their confidence. The other thing that I think women should take out time for is basically the development plans the L&D provides within the organization. Trust me, if you have ever worked in the L&D department, there are enough and more programs that we circulate based on self-nomination, and sometimes employees, and especially also women, do not take advantage of that. They say, I'm too busy to participate, but this is for your own development, right?
Yeah.
So I think you have to take the onus of your development in your hand. And finally, I think that there are a lot of external certifications available today. If you want to make your resume stronger, I think you have to sort of take out time and invest in yourself. I think everything makes you attractive to an employer. That is something that you have to do for yourself. I mean, this is probably one part of what I think women can do. And the other part is probably more personal. I think there are a lot of gender stereotypes that our society has, like a lot of times you will see women feeling guilty about leaving their young children at home, or sometimes they fall under the pressure of maybe even the husband or the in-laws who are asking them to take out more time for the family. Here they need to make that decision. It really is their life, and nobody else is going to make these decisions for them. If you need to grow in your career, you want to be happy about what you have achieved, you need to understand that these are stereotypes that you need to challenge and break in your everyday life. And get your families to be more responsive to a lot of your responsibilities and participate. I think this pandemic has moved many families towards sharing this this personal responsibility of home and childcare. But I think we still have a long way to go. Many more need to understand that home and childcare is not just a woman's job, and even the bread earning responsibility is not just a man's job. All of this has to be distributed.
Yeah, shared responsibility, self-belief, investment in oneself. A lot of takeaways, Freya, and I think great insights for the audience and also for many organizations that they can take forward. Simi, let me come to you. Simi, let me check. What else do you think we can do to empower women?
A lot. Just a lot. So I liked the points that have come in so far, be it more storytelling, more role models, more mentors and sponsors, more male allies, more women allies, right? So there's just a lot. When we talk about, again, participation with the government, yeah, corporates can do a big, wonderful job by partnering with local governments, doing more in terms of vocational skills, helping make sure that every, their CSR agenda also should be such that, let's keep every girl child in the school. Let's make sure that every girl child has equal rights, right? So government is trying to do its job, and corporates can really add more power with their clout. I liked what Shreya mentioned about the pandemic and its effects. And in a way, it has, instead of accelerating, sort of done the opposite for, women and their representation. A lot of women dropped out of the workforce because, they had children to take care of who are currently not in schools but are at home. A lot of caregiving responsibilities went up. And at this point in time, organizations, those who have, asked a lot of people to come back, or, it is in a way going to work on several women who are today comfortable probably with the hybrid model, right? Now, there is a bias called as a proximity bias, and that's a real bias, right? Where as a manager, I will tend to focus more on the individual that I'm seeing on a daily basis come into office versus somebody who is working remotely. And again, this is not something that a manager is doing consciously. It's a bias somewhere that's, coming up. So I think, again, more trainings, more awareness, more unconscious bias trainings, like I mentioned that more mentors and sponsors are very important, at least in corporate India. Unfortunately, after the #MeToo movement, I've heard a lot of people saying that I am scared to mentor a woman. And, these things again lead to stereotyping. So the more often we talk about all of this, it just seems to feel more and more real. So I think leaders at the level can set the tone and pave the way for these, I don't want to say incremental, but yeah, let's start with incremental changes and then aim for bigger things.
Absolutely, Simi. Can't agree any less with you. But I've been hearing this word ecosystem, government, partnering, and so on multiple times. So let me just zoom in that aspect so that our audience get a good sense of this piece. What is it that the government can do here differently to fix the gender pay gap in India? Are there any suggestions and recommendations that you have? Maybe do you think the new labor code on wages, do you think that is a solution that can fix this, or any other intervention that can come into play? Vanita, would you like to take this, please?
Yeah, sure, Hans. I think from a government perspective, there is a lot that can get done, and I think every government in their best, they are also doing. They roll out so many different initiatives, right, to build the ecosystem. So, in the context of what we are talking about, I think I would zoom out a little more and not just talk about pay parity specifically from a government perspective, but I would think, if I were to ask something or seek something of the government, I think that from an Indian ecosystem perspective, I think that would be to create an ecosystem of enablement, create safer workplaces for women, right? Create safer cities where more women can go out and go to workplaces and engage in meaningful work. Now, all the more, especially after the pandemic, and we see a lot of our employees have moved back to tier 2, tier 3 hometown cities and to hometowns, and many are continuing to work out of remote locations, which was not possible, right, in pre-pandemic. And many organizations have absolutely told their employees, okay, you're free to continue from there. Point is, how safe are these cities or these small towns for women and men to equally step out if they have to go to a workplace and engage in work and come back, as much as cities were? Okay, so that differentiation exists. Of course, cities have their own challenges as well, right? So I think government certainly can create, can raise the level of safety that all of us as citizens feel in the country, both men and women, even more so as women, because there are, traditionally we've had those socioeconomic barriers, we've had cultural barriers. In small towns, it's still it's still less developed in terms of mindset, primarily because of safety for women stepping out after certain hours, right? So if we have to create equitable workplaces where women also participate equally, then we need to create and enable ecosystem which would be safe for women to step out as well, as much as it is for men.
Sure, Vanita. Oh, yes, Shreya, please.
Yeah, so I really agree with Vanita, what she's saying. And I would actually like to add to that the ecosystem that she's talking about. Yes, safe environment. But I also want to discuss this whole maternity act that has come out. It's very, very helpful for women because it is giving them longer time with a newborn child that the newborn child really needs. It's actually supporting the entire community, because women will play that important role for a new child. However, I think that our government needs to also push for paternity benefits as well. And the reason why I say this is that till the time we do not have something which is more statutory in nature, I think paternity benefits will not be taken very seriously. And if you are creating awareness around paternity, it is clearly connecting men to childcare, which means that the woman who also is now a new parent will get support from their partners. And also that, what happened immediately after the new maternity act came into being is that a lot of employers started to say, okay, now I will have the woman gone for 6 months. And, these things even come up in interviews for young women. So if we are able to equate in some way this gap in time for men as well, I think the discrimination will reduce, because then, employers will say, okay, I need to pass on this benefit to men as well. And therefore, I'm creating a sort of, parity in behavior. And honestly speaking, even though men will not raise hands and say, okay, I would like to spend some time with my newborn child or my young child, they are equally passionate about being a parent. These days, I think the attitude is changing. Young parents want to spend time with their children. And when men raise their hands to do that, because of these stereotypes, stereotypes, men are looked at not serious with their work because they want to move away and take care of children. I think indirectly it's going to help both and create that difference.
Absolutely, Shreya.
Liked what Shreya said. Sorry, and it took me back to that image that was circulating on WhatsApp where, a woman seen with her child is like, she's taking care of the child. And a man with his child, the caption is a man babysitting. So why should a man be babysitting his child? A man is also caring. So these narratives further go on to kill the business case. So I think, again, communication, those positive drives, etc., are very, very powerful. I also feel media has a role to play in the sense, look at the ads that are, coming out every other day, right? I mean, how are you defining the woman next to the washing machine or the Lysol ad for floor cleaner, right? And how are you depicting the man, right? Next to a, fancy sports car or something of that nature, right? So I think, in a way, Cadbury did a good job,
Yes.
I think late last year, where they, did a role swap, where there was a woman cricketer and her male friend cheering, So a lot of work, but I think, there's a very, very big power in communication, in training, in awareness building. So I just thought I'd come in here.
Absolutely, Simi. Absolutely. See, the interesting narrative here is gender pay parity is not only about money, not only about compensation. It's about inclusivity. It's about breaking the bias. It's about removing stereotypes and moving on. And she's just said about the Cadbury's ad. It was very nostalgic with very powerful message, where the previous one was a male cricketer and a female partner cheering up. And then the roles reversed, the new ad.
It took Cadbury close to 28 years, by the way. The first one was when I was probably a small child, and now, so it took 28 years for Cadbury to figure out, hey, let's do a role swap.
But glad that it's happened.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. This conversation is really exciting and a lot of pointers are coming up. So maybe let's just move on, because this reminds me of Sheryl Sandberg. She once said, in future, there'll be no women leaders. There will only be leaders. So she moved away from saying men and women. She said, in future, there'll be only leaders. And I think that's the kind of course of conversation that we are taking. So let me then flip this here to either of you. How can we reach a situation where we just have leaders? Can we focus on learning opportunities, development opportunities? What is it that we can do differently to have inclusive leaders? Either in forms of policies, safe environment, respectable environment, and whatnot. So any thoughts around that, please?
I can go first, Hans. I'll again take the thread from where Simi left, right? Talking about ads. I think Ariel is doing a great job of saying share the load. Right. So I think to your point, it is so much more. I think a lot of this starts at home. Because at the end of the day, all of this is community living. While we are talking about roles of men and women and pay parity at workplaces, we also need to acknowledge that we also have another part of us, irrespective of gender, going back to our homes for our cooking, cleaning, laundry, whatever else, right? So where is the bulk of responsibility lying for the balance part of what we are perhaps not talking about within the scope of corporate or workplaces? As much as we talk about teamwork within an office space, can we talk about teamwork in the domestic setup as well? And that could mean even, and perhaps maybe we will need a few generations for us in India to get there. But for us, it is about, can we train our young boys and girls to say, do your chores at home equally. Right? If it means that, I have to teach my daughter a little in the kitchen, equally my son also is present there. And similarly, if they are playing soccer or basketball, both of them get the equal opportunity. Could be our nephews, nieces, people whom we interact with. I think it needs to start at much younger level in the microcosms of our society, because that is where we actually begin to break the biases. Because once that mindset is broken, then we stop thinking as men, women, these things are, it's very natural. We naturally become inclusive about it. We don't differentiate. But in my view, it needs to start at home. It needs to start for all of us as a society, and all of us can contribute. Of course, when we come to workplaces, where we have positions of leadership and influence, can we consciously, mindfully, again, we spoke a lot about mindfulness, look for pockets of minority, right? Gender could be one part, but can we look for pockets of minority? Especially in India, the kind of diversity is very, very large, right? We have cultural diversity within our country is very huge. So be it language, which part of the country we are coming from, some of our habits and practices. So how can we create a more inclusive workplace if you are a leader of influence in your organization? I think that, and of course, role modeling, the last point, right? I think these are some points I'd like to table, which will actually bring the true difference and let us stop talking as men or women, but truly as leaders.
Okay, can I go next? Vanita, excellent points, really. In my opinion, an inclusive leader is a brave leader. because they are setting the tone, they are choosing to do things differently. And I also believe that an inclusive leader is one with very high EQ, emotional intelligence, which means that they not only do it themselves, but also propagate this across the organization, which is, deep listening, right? So when you listen more, you're more curious, you're trying to understand the other person's point of view. You're mindful of your hijacks that are happening, right? The so-called unconscious biases that sort of hijack your decision making. So being more mindful, a little slow in decision making. And the reason why I feel that we are still talking about male pilots, male leaders, female leaders, male politicians, female, I think it's also rooted in the fact that at the back end, we are constantly monitoring it also, right? Because we want to somewhere get the scales back from the tilted, point of view. And we are doing those Excel sheets, those bar diagrams, and we are saying women in this level, so many women in leadership, so many, and therefore, the narrative, women leaders, right? So I think once we achieve a situation where there is a lot of diversity, and you don't need to go back and start looking at percentage of women here, there, and I think automatically leaders will be called as leaders, pilots will be called pilots, and astronauts will be called astronauts, right? Now people think that it's important to prefix this. I mean, my last commentary here would be that inclusion works in everybody's favor. And an inclusive leader need not just focus on, fixing things for women, but even things like increasing the parental leave, or let's just call it, in fact, paternal leave is what Shreya called it. In fact, why don't we just call it parental leave, right? Which can be taken by, any of the genders, right? Government will give us those statutory laws, etc. But as organizations, can we do more, right? So if you look at the prevention of sexual harassment, right, it doesn't really encompass transgender people, right? But then as an organization, you can always say that my prevention of sexual harassment policy will cover people from all genders. So you can make a claim, you can set the standard higher, and just not look at what the government is asking corporates to do. So inclusion works for everyone, and an inclusive leader understands this, and very soon we'll just be called leaders, because that'll become a way of life, hopefully.
Absolutely. Shreya, anything that you would like to add, please?
Thanks, and so basically, let me actually bring back what Vanita was talking about. I feel cooking and cleaning, keeping your house clean, tidy, are life skills. I think when kids move out of homes and start to live, get their first jobs, they struggle because of the gender inequities that happened at home, right? So I think it should now be looked at as life skills that is not gender specific anymore. And similarly, I think that's where we start thinking of everything as not gender specific anymore, because just like how Simi said, we have seen in our careers a lot of leaders, whether men or women, who have failed quite miserably, and we have seen some excellent leaders, whether women or men, who have succeeded, and it is just about their natural inclusive behavior that attracts employees, that motivates employees to perform to their fullest. So I think this is really the difference that creates excellent leaders, which is inclusive leadership behaviors. And I think that organizations need to add this particular aspect to all their leadership building programs. So, we talk about in the leadership building programs, all different competencies. And why are we not looking at inclusive leadership as a part of those, future leader programs? Why are we not talking about how we have diversities and how we can create inclusion for these diversities? Because we are going to lead everybody, right? So this, I feel, should be a very, very big part of the L&D programs that we are developing within the organization. Also, I feel that culturally, we have to work towards just making the workplace very inclusive. It really works even for your employer's branding, right? I mean, if you go to the market today and ask the young talent what organization you want to join, the names that they will take are the ones who have this open culture, this inclusive culture of workplace, which actually develops young talent into inclusive people. Whether you're a manager and then you become go into leadership position, so it just imbibes that culture from the very beginning, from frontline. So I think that's where we need to sort of put our intentional efforts to build that culture.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Shreya, Simi, and Vanita. I would love to continue this conversation, but then in the interest of time, we will have to wrap up for today. But great conversation. And along the way, there were a lot of takeaways. So pay parity is not about money, as I said before. It goes to inclusivity, leadership walking the talk, and to the most recent point that Shreya said about building a brand for the organization itself. There have been a lot of questions from the audience, and I'm sure during the course of conversation, many of them have been addressed. But there is one question for which I don't think we really got an answer. So let me get that question. What percentage of pay gap is acceptable? And why do you think that pay gap is acceptable? So this is a question from an audience. Vanita, Shreya, Simi, who would like to pick this up?
Yeah. There is no gap. I mean, no percentage of gap that is acceptable. It has to be absolutely equal. And why not? So, we are not even talking about a gap here. We are trying to get rid of the gap here.
Absolutely.
So that is where you need to sort of put your target at.
Empathetic answer, right? There should be no gap. That's it. No further debate there. Completely agree with you, Shreya. Thank you. And I can see Simi and Vanita nodding. So they are also in full agreement. Thank you. Melita, I see you on screen. Melita, are there any questions that we have still not answered? Or is there any point that you want us to get in depth again, please?
No, I think everyone has taken the chance and answered well. So there is no questions from the audience.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so Melita, then I'll hand it back to you to wrap it up for today. Melita?
Yeah, so as this session ends, that was really an absolutely insightful session. I'm sure IDF members as well as our D&I leaders who joined us today will have multiple takeaway from this Charcha. I would like to thank our speakers for their great insights and thought-provoking discussion. I would also like to thank our audience for keeping this session interactive and spending time out of their busy schedules to be here with us. I'm happy to announce that India Diversity Forum is organizing the second edition of India Diversity Conclave on 6th April from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Lalit Suri Hotel, Mumbai, where we are going to have all D&I experts, MDs, CEOs, CHROs sharing their knowledge on various aspects of diversity and inclusion. For more details on the conclave, please do visit our webpage, conclave.indiadiversityforum.org. On this note, I would like to end the session and once again thank all the speakers and audiences for their time. Meet you all at the next month's D&I Pe Charcha. Until then, thank you and keep safe.
Thank you.